Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about an interesting physiological occurrence called Raynaud's phenomenon. So let's get to it. Okay everyone, Raynaud's phenomenon. Let's get started. So the goals of this lesson are first to talk about what is Raynaud's phenomenon. Secondly, what happens during a Raynaud attack. Then we'll talk about primary versus secondary Raynaud's, including the pathogenesis for each of them. And then finally, we'll talk about why Raynaud's is more common in females. So first, what is Raynaud's phenomenon? So under the body's normal physiologic response to cold, the blood vessels in your extremities will constrict to lower the blood flow and prevent heat loss. However, in Raynaud's, there's an exaggerated vascular response to cold temperature or emotional stress. And this most often affects the digits, so the fingers or toes, but it can also sometimes affect the ears, nose, face, knees, or nipples. And then some of the symptoms we might see with Raynaud's are color changes. So we can see here what that looks like, either white or blue. Also, sometimes there's pain, sometimes a numbness or tingling, and then also something called livedo reticularis. And this is essentially a modeling or net-like pattern of discoloration. Okay, so we know what Raynaud's is, but what happens during a Raynaud attack? So the Raynaud attack is typically divided into three different phases. The first phase is ischemia. And here, the vasospasms in the blood vessels block off the flow of blood. And so, because your fingers aren't getting blood flow, they're going to turn white. So that's the ischemia phase. The next phase is cyanosis. And here, your fingers have been blocked off from the blood flow. And so the vessels are dilating and then filling with deoxygenated blood. And that's why your fingers will next turn blue. And then finally, the third phase is the Ruber phase. And here, your vessels are still dilated, but then the vasospasm suddenly relaxes. And so oxygenated blood from the arteries come and fill your fingers, and that's why they turn pink. So we have this sort of pattern of going from white to blue to pink during the Raynaud attack. Okay, so now we are going to talk about primary versus secondary Raynaud's. So primary Raynaud's is the most benign form of Raynaud's. It's more common in younger women. And then the pathogenesis of primary Raynaud's is thought to be an increase in the alpha-2 adrenergic response. So this figure here sort of demonstrates that. This top row is sort of a control for a normal individual. And these little Y-shaped molecules here, these represent the alpha-2 receptors. So you see there's sufficient amount of them, and under normal conditions, thermoneutral, we get good blood flow. And then upon cold exposure, the alpha-2 receptors cause some constriction and there's a reduction in blood flow, but we still have this blood flow going. However, on this bottom row, this is demonstrating an individual with Raynaud's, we see this increased abundance of these alpha-2 receptors. And we can notice even under the thermoneutral conditions, there's reduced blood flow. See here, the 3 arrows versus 2. And then under cold exposure, there's going to be like blocking off the blood flow because this response is exaggerated. So we don't get any blood flow during the cold exposure. And that causes the symptoms that we see with Raynaud's. Okay, so we got primary. Now let's talk about secondary. So secondary Raynaud's is sometimes referred to as Raynaud syndrome. And this is due to blood vessel damage from some sort of secondary factor. So it can be a disease, something like scleroderma or lupus or a number of others. It can be environmental due to something like vibrational injury. And then it can also be due to drugs or toxins. Okay, so last thing we are going to touch on here is why females are more affected by Raynaud's phenomenon. And it's thought that this is due to the action of estrogen. And this is a study that was done in 2017 on a mouse model where they essentially applied different levels, different doses of estrogen, and looked at the change in plantar skin blood flow, this PSBF. And we can see here at higher levels of estrogen, there's a greater reduction in the PSBF. So here, this bar graph also shows at higher doses of estrogen, there's more reduction in the PSBF. So that's why we think that estrogen is the reason females are more affected by Raynaud's. Okay, so now in summary for today, what did we learn? So first we learned that Raynaud's phenomenon is an exaggerated vascular response to cold or stress. We learned that a Raynaud attack comprises an ischemia, cyanotic, and Ruber stage. We learned that Raynaud's is classified as either primary or secondary. The primary form is benign, more often affects younger females, and the pathogenesis is driven by an increase in alpha 2 adrenergic response. Secondary Raynaud's is due to a secondary factor like a disease, an environmental cause, or drugs or toxins. And then lastly, we learned that females are more commonly affected due to the action of estrogen on peripheral vessels. Okay, here are my references if you'd like to learn more. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe. Take care, everyone. I will see you in the next one.